All right, so this is an issue that I've been talking about repeatedly over the last couple of weeks or months even now, and that is the global vaccine apartheid that has been enforced by countries like the United States and other wealthy Western countries, specifically in Europe, that have been blocking this proposal at the World Trade Organization that was put forward by countries like India and South Africa. And the proposal was basically, let's waive the COVID vaccine patents that were largely developed with public money. Let's waive the COVID vaccine patents so that all countries around the world have the ability to produce and distribute cheap alternatives to the current ones that these private companies are essentially price gouging poorer nations for. And the result of this has been catastrophic. I mean, we have all of these countries around the entirety of Africa, Southeast Asia, that have had almost no access to the vaccines whatsoever, while we have this continuing good news here in the United States with more and more people getting vaccinated. That's a good thing, but it's something that can be entirely undone if we just let COVID spread in all of these other countries around the world, because then we're going to have new variants that pop up. And because of our global interconnected economy and world, those variants are going to come back over here to the United States. And we're never going to be able to move to a post-COVID world. And so if you're somebody who cares about that, this should be a priority for you. And here's Bernie Sanders basically trying to push Joe Biden to do this very simple thing. Which is, give in to this demand or this ask from these other countries to relinquish the patents, because we need to prioritize, obviously, saving millions of lives instead of the big pharmaceutical profits that are to be made from this. So here's what they had to say. Calling the issue a matter of, quote, common sense and morality, Senator Bernie Sanders on Friday, backed by millions of Americans demanding the same, urged U.S. President Joe Biden to support an international effort to suspend coronavirus-related patent protections that are artificially limiting vaccine supply and depriving poor nations of access to life-saving shots. We must do everything humanly possible to crush this global pandemic and save millions of people who are in danger of needlessly dying, the Vermont senator said during a virtual event hosted by Public Citizen and joined by other public health advocates and lawmakers. He continues, quote, ending this pandemic requires collaboration, solidarity, and empathy. It requires a different mindset, the mindset that tells the pharmaceutical industry that saving perhaps millions of lives is more important than protecting their already excessive profits. Sanders continued, echoing experts' warning about the emergence and spread of vaccine-resistant mutations. Quote, to me, this is not a huge debate. This is common human morality. It's not just about the morality. He's 100% right on the morality of it. We should prioritize millions of human lives over vaccine profits for these big pharmaceutical companies, period. That should be the end of the discussion. But unfortunately, it's not. And there are a lot of other interests at stake here that people have vested in it. So we can address those arguments as well. This does, as Bernie Sanders pointed out in here, this does not make sense if you want to move to a post-COVID society, which every single person, I'm assuming, does, unless you just are really into COVID. Everybody wants to move past COVID. And one of the prerequisites to moving to a post-COVID society is we have to address that from a global scale, from a global perspective. If all of these new variants are just allowed to pop up and spread around these other countries, then we're going to eventually, as he pointed out, there are going to be vaccine-resistant strains that pop up, and then it will nullify all of the progress that we have made. So this is a perfect test for humanity, really, and our global capitalist system is absolutely failing so far in this test. But it's a test to say, are we going to prioritize public health and seriously address the problem at the root cause? Or are we just going to allow this to continue to spread because some fucking pharmaceutical executives want to make an extra buck? That's the question that's on the table right now. And it's taken literally weeks, if not months, to even get somewhat of an answer out of the Biden administration. And even then, they were tepid in their responses and they didn't commit one way or another. It's just been absolutely pathetic. And let me just say this. Without exaggeration, if Joe Biden chooses to protect these patents over relinquishing them in this specific proposal, if he does not follow through on this, this is akin to mass murder. I mean, I don't know what else you would call it. To decide that protecting pharmaceutical profits over millions of lives, that's nothing more or nothing less than mass murder that would be intentional on the part of all of these Western wealthy developed nations that are hoarding these vaccines and not allowing these other countries to produce it. Keep in mind, we're not talking about the United States producing vaccines and then shipping them off to these countries. That's an entirely different thing, which I think we should also do. But this is about letting these countries or other countries around the world develop the vaccines themselves. They're not even just asking for a handout. They're simply asking to be allowed to use this science that was developed by scientists. And I hate this notion that a lot of people put out there, a lot of conservatives, even Democrats often, will point out like, oh, well, they took a big risk. They invested in this. They innovated. The fucking pharmaceutical executives who are collecting these profits, they weren't the ones who innovated. The ones who innovated were the scientists. And you know who else can fund scientists? The government, the public, which we did on these vaccines. So it just makes no sense from any angle, unless it's just the angle of I want to get butt fucked by these big pharmaceutical companies and have COVID continue to exist in our world. That's the only angle that it makes sense from. And the consequences from this have been great. I mean, right now we've been seeing a recent major surge in India. And just to give you a perspective on this, the United States in vaccinations, right? So we're at about 41% with their first dose and about 27% fully vaccinated. Just to give you a comparison of India, which is a country obviously with over 1 billion people, they have 8.6% with their first shot, it looks like, and less than 2% fully vaccinated. So clearly there's a problem going on here. Clearly some of these other countries, I mean, we could look in many parts of Africa around this map and many of these other places in the Middle East as well, and Southeast Asia that haven't been able to get access to these. And then you look at like wealthy Western developed countries and it's an entirely different story. And so this is what we're seeing right now. This is a modern day vaccine apartheid that is being inflicted upon these other countries who are not allowed to produce a vaccine to save their populations. And it's leading to horrific results. I just saw this video yesterday. I'm not going to play it for you, but I'll link it down in the description, where they were describing the horrific conditions on the ground in India. But this is something where you can generally apply it to many other countries around the world. If you don't have access to the vaccine, COVID's not going anywhere, and we're just going to continue seeing these waves. And right now in India, I mean, 332,000 COVID cases in a single day, and their hospitals are overflowing. And this is a major problem, again, because even if you don't want to look at it from the humanitarian perspective of, oh, well, we should help some of these other countries just for the sake of saving human lives, even if you don't give a shit about that, you should care, because this is how mutations pop up. And then eventually COVID vaccine resistant mutations pop up. So this is a problem we cannot get out of. And just to give you a perspective on how much profit these companies have already made throughout this process. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca, 3 of the world's top coronavirus manufacturers, have paid out a combined $26 billion in dividends and stock buybacks to their shareholders over the past year, a sum that could fully fund the cost of inoculating Africa's entire 1.3 billion person population. So just from the profits they have made so far, they could afford to vaccinate the entire continent of Africa. And we're sitting here having to debate whether or not we should relinquish the patents. Again, this is a different story. This is saying they could afford to actually vaccinate them. But it's an entirely different question to say, well, we should just relinquish the patents so that they can help vaccinate themselves. We're not willing to do either of these things. What does that say about our current global system here? Our current global capitalist system that demands profits for a couple executives at these big pharmaceutical companies at the expense of literally the entire rest of the world. Because the entire rest of the world is not going to be able to move past COVID unless we solve it as a global community. And right now, we're not solving it as a global community. This is an apartheid. So again, not an issue we can ignore. Bernie Sanders is 100% right calling out Joe Biden. The pressure needs to continue until something is done about this. And the thing that needs to be done is you abide by that World Trade Organization proposal that was put forward by India and South Africa, and you relinquish these patents, because it's absolutely pathetic, it's ridiculous, and this is a gigantic humanitarian crisis. But if Joe Biden doesn't do this, make no mistake about it, there is blood on his hands.